What up, guys? What up? What up, man? It has been a while, guys. It's been a while. Been a few weeks. I know. Haven't made a video in a few weeks. So there's just been a lot going on. Good things, dude. A lot of good things going on. Um. But you are gonna see a lot of videos be dropping, the next couple of weeks. So you are gonna be seeing a lot more videos coming. I'm gonna make a separate video, kind of just discussing a little bit with y'all of some of the things that's coming. Discord, website setup, certain future plans that I'm trying to do with the channel, and other channels and things of that nature, right? So I'll make another video related to that. So like that, anybody who's interested that want to, um, you know, participate in some of these. Whether it be Discord or whether it be some of the back end stuff that's happening. Um, you know, there'll be some more details coming out related to that. But guys, again, man, I know it's been a while. I'm excited to be back, make some videos, and again, gonna be a lot more videos to come. In this video, this is gonna be a part three series of comparing SQL Server and Postgres. So I got a request. Again, a lot of my videos come from requests, guys. So I got a request and hey, can you make a part three? So that's what I'm gonna do. We're gonna make a part three today, and let's compare some differences between SQL Server and Postgres. The reason why I'm picking SQL Server and Postgres to compare, because that's where my experience is at. I have experience with other databases, but these two are the ones that I use often, that I am just more familiar with than any other database. So that's the reason why. But guys, before we get started, if you could give me a follow, if you could give me a like, man, I really, really appreciate it, man. Give me a follow, give me a like. Appreciate all the support, and let's get started. All right, guys. So I already got the SQL up, which we for us to compare. So on the left side is SQL Server. You can tell up here on the top. The right side is going to be Postgres. Okay. So one of the first things that we're going to be comparing here is going to be functions, right? But in this case, it's going to be a specific function, right? A scalar function. So we're going to compare how do we create one in SQL Server, and then how do we create one in Postgres. And if you're not familiar with a scalar function, what kind of function this is, there are different types of functions in SQL. You know, there's functions that return back a value, right? Like one value back. There's other functions that return back tables that you get back an actual, the object is the actual data set, like the table, right? You got many rows and many columns that get returned back. But in this case, we're returning back a value only, right? And the function that we're going to be creating takes a input, so it does have a parameter, and it's going to return back a value in return. So that's what we're comparing here in this case. So if we take a look at the create function, right? So we have create function, and then DBO, because again, we're dealing with SQL Server. I call this FN for function, remove leading zeros, or zero, right? That's, the name of the function. This takes in a input. So as you can tell, we got the parentheses. So you create your function, parentheses, and then again in SQL Server, you're gonna have an at symbol in front of your input name, right? Whatever you decide to call it, you will have an at symbol in front. But you also got to specify the data type, right? In my case, this happens to be a varchar. It's a string, and I have it set to 255, which means if it's something greater than 255, it is going to error out. So keep that in mind. And then below that, we have the return statement. So because in this function, we're specifically returning back a value only, right? One input value, and we're returning back a value in return. We have to specify returns the data type. So in this case, we're returning back a value that happens to be varchar 255. All right. Once we specify that, then ultimately it's like any other function or procedure that exists. It will be as, and then you have your begin and end statements, right? A lot of these you'll see those patterns, begin and end. So you have begin, and inside the begin, between the begin and end, is ultimately where you're doing whatever it is that you're doing, right? Whatever logic, all that stuff, it's all between there. In this case, we're returning back a value. So what I did here, I declared a new variable when I called it at new value, and then I called it varchar 255. And then inside my select statement, I'm doing something. So this is a placeholder, but you do whatever it is. In this case, it's doing the removing leading zeros, for example. But it does that logic, and then ultimately just being assigned to this value. And then, of course, I return it back, right? I could have just done as well. Instead of having the select statement, I could have just done return, I think this value, and that should have worked. But either way, as you could tell, I'm returning back the new value. So I declared it, I'm setting the value, and then I'm returning it. That's pretty much what I'm doing here. And again, this, got to keep in mind though, this value that's being returned does need to match the data type that we specify that it's going to be returning back. All right, so you kind of keep that in mind. So this is how you create a Sql function in SQL Server. Now let's look at the equivalent, but in Postgres. That would be over here on the right. So I'll try to use the same somewhat naming convention as well. So of course, in this case, it's not just create function, it's create or replace function. Okay, and then of course we have public, which is our schema, and then the name of our function, which is the same name. As you could tell, there are different formats. These are all lowercase with underscores. This is not. In Postgres, one of the patterns that you will see most often than not is everything lowercase with underscores to separate it. You don't have to do it that way, but that's, again, it's kind of like if you deal with enough databases, you will see that design pattern that naming convention, is what seems to be applied most often than not. Where in SQL Server, it's kind of mixed, but I see a lot of this format in SQL Server. So that's the reason why I'm trying to keep it at least with the standard that I have seen. But at the end of the day, they could all, technically this could look the same. It could be caps, and that's totally fine. So we take a look at the parentheses that we have here. Let me try to format it the same way, just to kind of make it a little bit easier to see. In this case, we actually have our first we have our input, which is string alphanumeric, right? Same as this. And then we specify the data type. In this case, is the character. Ultimately, this is pretty much the equivalent of varchar in Postgres. So, that's what I'm using. You could use varchar, specify value. That would work. In this case, though, I'm kind of leaving it open-ended. So there is no length limit. So even if it exceeds 255, it won't break, right? So that's kind of the reason why I did it this way. And then also, after that, we have out. So out is, again, input. Then we have output. The output, we're specifying, well, what is the name of the value of that variable, right? That we're going to we want to come out of the function. And in this case, I called it new value. Where over here in this case, we don't necessarily specify anything like that. Only thing we do here, return, is specify the data type. And then, of course, we return back a value, which needs to be the same data type. Over here, though, we're actually specifying the name of the value. We're saying, hey, this is going to be the name of our variable that we want to get out of the function. And this is the equivalent of declaring a variable. So just like over here, I have to declare new value. Well, this is doing the same thing. I'm saying out, and then it's declaring a variable called new value, which happens to be varchar, text value. So this is doing the same thing what this is doing. That's why I don't need to create any, there's no declare variable here Like I'm not declaring anything within the begin statement. Now I do have to specify, just like over here, returns the data type. We specify the language, right? And the language, so Postgres has its own procedural language, right? I think I talked about it in one of my other videos. Same thing with SQL Server. SQL Server is T-SQL. Postgres is PL/PG/SQL. But in Postgres, there are other languages that you could utilize. Like you could utilize Python within Postgres, and there's a few other languages that you could use as well. But in this case, we're just sticking to the Postgres procedural language, what we're using. So that's why we got to specify the language. Then of course we just put as function, $signs, function, and then of course we begin our statement. Same thing over here, right? Begin our statement. So same concept. In this case, though, as you could tell over here, we return back a value. We don't have to specify return over here. All we need to do is assign a value, something, right? Like we're doing something, or let's say we're doing some kind of math function, some kind of mathematics, where maybe this is a number variable, and then we're saying times 5, and then that number would just get assigned to this variable, which is what this is doing. This is assigning it to this value, and then that's it. It will return back that value because we already specified up here on top. It's out. It's going to return it out, right? So again, that's kind of there are differences. I would say when you look at it, there is differences for sure. There's a lot of similarities, but there are a lot of differences. So hopefully this kind of helps out to see the difference of a SQL Server function, Sql function, and a Postgres function. All right, guys. So now let's go. Now we're going to look at create procedures with parameters, right? So in part 2 we reviewed how do we create procedures. Well, in this part we're going to do procedures with parameters. That's what we're going to be dealing with. So same concept as the way you create procedures. The difference is we have parentheses, and we're specifying some sort of value, right? Something's got to get input in. In this case, we call it at or code, right? That's just the name that I called it. And then I got to specify the data type. In this case, is a varchar. And then after that, it's pretty much you have your as, then begins. Okay, so very straightforward. Again, no difference, nothing different compared to any other procedures that we have dealt with in the past. Only difference is normally when you just create a procedure without arguments, this is not there. It's gone. In this case, parentheses. Again, you got to remember to have your at symbol in the beginning of your naming variable, right? So keep that in mind. Your argument needs to have the at in front of it. Then it will be whatever data type it is. If we look at the begin statement, all we're doing here is something like update from this table where or code equals this or code over here, right? You have the at symbol, so that's how you can tell the difference, even though the name is the same, but this one has the at symbol in front. And then all we're doing is something very basic. We're taking the value, the interchange control number, adding it by 1. And then we're setting that value and updating the table with the new value. So this is a very basic example of how we could take arguments, use them in the where statement, and then of course we're just doing some kind of action here. Very straightforward. And now we look at the Postgres version of it. Very similar. Again, create or replace procedure, and then we specify, we got a schema or a procedure name, and then we have our input. This is our variable. And now you could tell there's no at symbol in Postgres. We just specify the name, like whatever name we're going to call it. And then we do got to specify data type, right? So same thing like SQL Server, specify data type. And then we got to specify the language, right? This is where it's slightly different than SQL Server. SQL Server, you don't specify the language. By default, it's T-SQL. That's what it is. And Postgres, you got to specify the language, which in this case is PL/PG/SQL. And then we see as $, procedure, and then we got our begin statement. So this is going to be pretty much identical to what we have in SQL Server. We got an update from this table. We're setting a value, adding by one, and then we got where or code equals or code input. Now here's the thing, because in SQL Server I could name my variable, my input name the same as my column name, because I have an at symbol in front. That distinguishes the difference. You can't do that in Postgres. If I were to call this or code, well, it's going to get confused because I already have an or code. That's why I had to change it up a little bit. I call it or code input. So you kind of keep that in mind, right? If you are passing in some arguments, you got some parameters, right? Whatever name you give it, don't name it the same as your table columns that you have already. And then of course you just finish it off by end, and then you got to specify this $ procedure $ at the end. So which is different, because you don't do that in SQL Server. So again, a lot of similarities, but some small differences for sure. But overall, this is pretty very similar when you look at it. It's actually very similar. Okay, so now let's look at cross apply and lateral joins. So these are technically the same thing, right? But as you could tell, these are done differently. Like there is a difference. Like, so if you're familiar with cross apply and you want to know, well, how do I do cross apply in SQL Server? My bad, in Postgres, because there is no cross apply in Postgres. Well, there is lateral joins, which is the equivalent of cross apply. So just keep that in mind. Now, those of you who are new may be asking, what the hell is cross apply? What is lateral joins? Just to keep it simple, think of it as anytime you may have a table. Let's say you got a list like 100 records in a table, and now you want to do some sort of processing, some sort of comparison, or some sort of mathematics against another table, but then you got to do it one by one, row by one, row by row. You're able to do a cross apply that will literally evaluate every row one by one, right? So out of your list of 100, so let's kind of take a look at it, right? I guess that's review, and I'll explain that kind of review what it is, so if you're familiar with it. So we look at how, in this case, we're doing a update. We're doing an update, and we're using cross apply to do an update. What we're pretty much doing here, we have a table called order trends, and we want to set this column, which is called send to trade partner organization ID. We want to set it to this value here, which is going to come from the cross apply. All right. So this is coming from order trends, and ultimately we're saying, okay, order trends has we're looking for anything that's a new status that happens to be direction type outbound. That's what we're saying here, right? So let's say we have 100 new records that happen to be part of an outbound status. And what we're saying here, like, hey, I want to be able to search those 100 records that we have, and I want to search the same table, which is going to be what's in here, same table. But I want to search only for a different type, a direction type, which is inbound, that have already been processed, that's a complete status. And I want to search by this key value reference number, because that's what makes it unique. So it's kind of like I have one table, and I have a set record of 100, but now I want to search against that same table, but on a different type, which will be a different data set. And I'm pretty much doing the comparison one by one. That's what a cross apply does. And I'm doing the matching of it, right, by reference number. I'm pretty much saying, hey, do these numbers match? And if I get a hit, and it says, yep, this matches that. From an inbound type to an outbound type, let's say the reference number is 2 and 2, they match. Then that's where it said, okay, if it matches, return back this value. It's going to get returned over here, because you can tell, call it IPT. It's my alias name of this data set. And then I'm going to assign it to this value type deal. So that's kind of what I'm doing here. Now, here's the thing. One could say, well, man, you could just do that with a join. If you're joining it together, you could do it that way. And you can, right? Now, because I'm joining the same table, um, there's things that you could do within the join as well too. But in this case, I'm using a cross apply to evaluate each one. There's other stuff you could do, like let's say you're doing some sort of calculations, some mathematics on here, and you could return back that value, set it, or whatever it may be, right? So I mean, there's a lot that you can do with it. I'm just trying to show you at least an example of cross apply. And again, if you're already familiar with cross apply, I don't need to explain. But either way, we're going to do the same thing, but in Postgres. And Postgres is called lateral joins. So you'll see it's very similar. We have our order trans table, we have our column, and we're setting this value. So same concept, same thing as we had over here. The difference is it's called join lateral. And it's very similar. I mean, our select statement is identical when you look at it. It's pretty much the same because so also one thing I should have mentioned, cross apply with joins. When you have like a subquery and it's a join, you cannot reference what's inside the subquery. That's independent. In cross apply, as you could tell, see how my alias table out here outside the subquery, like this cross apply, it's OT2. Well, I'm actually using that within the cross apply. So you're able to do that. So that's one of the benefits of it. You cannot do that with a join, like a subquery within a join. That does not work. So same thing with join lateral. I am joining a value from this table that's outside of the subquery within this, join lateral. And you can see me joining it here. And then if I get a match, it returns back this value. And then I am setting that value over here. So again, if you are switching from SQL to Postgres or Postgres to SQL, there's a real good chance that you have used cross apply or join laterals. So now if you're curious, so well, how do I do it? How do I like what's the equivalent of join lateral in SQL Server? Well, it's cross apply. And vice versa. What is the equivalent of cross apply and Postgres? It's join lateral. So really not that hard, but at least now you know, right? If you're not familiar. Again, guys, hopefully this helps, man. Hopefully this helps. I'm gonna be making again a part 4, going over more stuff. Again, all I'm trying to do is find differences, like stuff that happens to be the same. I'm not going to talk about because if it's the same, there's no need for me to talk about. But I'm trying to focus on things that are different between SQL Server and Postgres. I'm not saying that one's better than the other. That's not the purpose of this video. Video purpose is strictly what's the difference. So if you happen to be somebody that's maybe your organization is migrating from Postgres to SQL Server, hopefully these videos here will give you a quick reference of some key differences, right? And I think it'll kind of hopefully, just help you out when you now are working, full time on another database, because there are some differences by all means. So that's the main purpose of this video. And hopefully it helps, guys. Hopefully it helps. Again, guys, I'm excited. I know it's been a while making some videos. I'm gonna be dropping a lot of videos. You're gonna see a lot of videos drop in the next couple of days. So a lot of new things to happen as well soon. So again, guys, appreciate it. Thanks for watching. Give me a like, give me a follow, and y'all take care, guys. Peace.